if there's an underlying rationale in a split second,
Yeah.
that you're making it in a moment of anger, in the heat of anger, like, I'm just going to kill her because she's not listening to me and, taking away her honor. I don't think the words honor killing are like flashing through this particular guy's head.
No, I really want people listening not to think this as all Arabs are functioning in this sort of forced marriage kind of way, because it really isn't true.
Or all Muslims.
Yeah, or all Muslims. Most people are not doing it this way, but the whole forced marriage, especially to family members, exists.
Yep.
And some older outside the country, like shipping her back to Iraq later on, how would you respond to somebody who says, like, well, this is my culture of forced and arranged marriages? Like, you're overimposing your Western, values and traditions.
I don't want to say the Western way of dating is the absolute pinnacle of reality. I like having more family involvement in dating, I think, is generally a positive thing. And there's things we can learn from Eastern cultures. But if you're pushing it to the extent that your daughter is begging not to be married to somebody and you're just pushing her towards that, that's evil. And it doesn't matter what culture you're from,
Right.
That's evil according to the laws of God himself.
Islam will continue to be triumphant until there have been 12 Khulafa, all of them from Al-Quraysh.
The God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed. Nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever.
This is my brother, my executor, and my successor among you, so listen to him and obey.
My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting.
Whoso obeys me obeys God. Whoever disobeys me disobeys God. Whoever disobeys my commander disobeys me.
The Lord said to me, You are my son. Today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage, and the ends of the earth your possession.
Two systems of government, two visions for life on earth. Whichever is true changes everything. This is Christ and Khulafa.
If anybody is watching this podcast right now and is being forced to get married or is a victim of domestic abuse and you want some help, please email info@almaida.org and we will do our very best to connect with people who will be there in person with you, listen to your problems, and intervene in any way they can to help you with your situation.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Christ and Caliphate. Today, we are going to cover a local story that happened here in Washington of an alleged honor killing attempt that led to the parents' arrest outside of Lacey High School here in Washington.
Timberline.
Okay, I'll read the whole thing.
Yeah, let's read the whole thing.
Washington. 2 Lacey parents are facing criminal charges, including assault, attempted murder, and attempted kidnapping, after several bystanders had to step in to stop a father from strangling his daughter outside a school. The incident happened outside Timberline High School on October 18th. The girls' parents, Ihsan and Sarah Ali, were both arrested after the confrontation, and court records indicate it could be related to a possible honor killing. So according to the court records, the 17-year-old victim told investigators her father had recently been threatening her with an honor killing after she refused to go to another country for an arranged marriage with an older man. She reportedly went to her school for help, which then led to the confrontation outside. The dad was on his back and his daughter was on top of him, and he had her in a chokehold. And there were other witnesses speaking to this. So one of them includes Josh Wagner, who was driving with his family near Timberline High School when he noticed that he thought was a group of kids fighting, but as he jumped in to break up the fight, he realized it was a man choking a teenage girl. And then he's quoted as being very angry as he witnessed this. So yeah, the court also states that Ihsan Ali was choking his 17-year-old daughter to the point where she had lost consciousness, as other students, including the girl's boyfriend, tried to pull her away. According to the court documents, the girl's mother, Sarah, was also grabbing at the girl and choking her. Investigators said the girl's father also punched the boyfriend. Court documents state that the girl eventually got away and ran into the school screaming, "My dad was trying to kill me. He was trying to kill me," which prompted a lockdown as school staff blocked the girl's parents from getting to her.
Gosh, she did it during school hours.
Yes. There's more quotes. Shall I continue?
Yeah.
This isn't right, and the more we continue to allow these types of actions to take place in a society where what the climate is, what it is right now, post-election, there's no place for that type of activity anywhere. That's Barnes's quote, the dad of the teenage boyfriend. And then a lot of these stories exist. A lot of these stories are out there. Some aren't able to be heard for whatever reason. Barnes added, "I just want people to be aware that these stories do exist." And then Barnes also told Como News that the issues with the Ali family had been going on for months, with one prior physical incident forcing them to get a temporary protection order against Zara, the mother, and court records state she was also banned from stepping into school property after that incident. Como News reached out to the Department of Children, Youth, and Families to see if they are investigating the Ali family, but we're told child welfare records are confidential. That's it.
Yikes.
So did you guys both see the footage?
Yes.
Did you see the footage?
No, I didn't.
You're better off having not seen that, honestly. It's just kind of 18 seconds of a group of high school students trying to beat up the sort of guy as he has his daughter in a headlock. It's pretty jarring.
Okay. I told my son about this, and he was like, "Really? Did that really happen?" And I was like, "No, it absolutely happened." And I explained a little bit about honor killings to him. I mean, we were on the way to school this morning, so
Yeah.
super fast, right? And then we talked about like I watched footage of a stoning in Afghanistan, and he was like, "Why'd you do that?" And I was like, "I watch all this stuff because people will tell you it didn't happen, right? People will tell you, or they'll try to like twist what happened, or bend it to a narrative or whatever." And I watched what I could of Daniel Pearl being beheaded, and what I could of October 7th. So after a while, you just have to shut it off. But it's you did see it, and it is jarring, right? It's jarring in real time. So I don't think a lot of people understand, like after talking to my son, what an honor killing is. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that, James?
Yeah, so essentially what an honor killing is when a girl is having seen to have disgraced her family's honor, someone in the family, whether it's a brother, her father, or an uncle, murders the woman.
And like only girls, right?
I think so. I maybe there's another example.
I've never heard of a male.
Yeah, I've never heard of that either. Doesn't mean it couldn't exist, but it's certainly something that happens more to women, and they're extrajudicially executed by a member of the family. And this tends to happen more in Muslim countries, especially right now.
I literally just looked up honor killing in the United States, and Wikipedia says several honor killings have been documented in the United States as of 2012, but there's no central agency that collects data across all jurisdiction in regards to honor violence in the United States, because there's a reluctance amongst some organizations to label events as honor killings to avoid stigmatizing Muslim and Arab cultures.
That was the headline in the article that you were saying. Was it possible honor killing? When, honestly, if you're going to look at it even objectively, they weren't just killing her because she didn't clean her room, right?
Yeah.
Or that, she was a bad daughter. I mean, there was, there was another guy involved, a non-Muslim, right? And she wasn't doing what, her parents wanted her to do, right? In regards to marriage. So,
yes. So I don't know any data on this outside of non-Muslim cultures. I'm sure it exists to some capacity because this isn't directly an Islam thing. There is nowhere in the Islamic sources or in popular Islamic culture where this kind of thing is glorified at all.
Mm-hmm.
This would actually be considered a crime under the Sharia.
Mm-hmm.
Even the most extreme interpretation of the Sharia, this is not the kind of thing that would be tolerated. So it doesn't come directly from Islam, nor is this something that's going to be, if you ask the average Iraqi, Arab, Afghani, Pakistani, and you ask, when a daughter dishonors her parents, is it okay for the father to kill her? The vast majority of the people are going to say, no, that's not okay. That's not a good thing. Nevertheless, this is something that is especially prevalent in a lot of Muslim cultures. And this is really a result of honor shame culture in general. But Islam has several things in that certainly heighten the honor shame nature of things.
Okay.
So let me tell you what those things are. First of all, public perception becomes very important in a lot of Muslim cultures because there is an instruction in the hadith to hide your sins. Meaning that if you've sinned and nobody has seen this happen, then basically Allah has kind of covered for you, right? He's had mercy on you by not letting you get caught. So the thing you should do is repent to God alone and don't do it again and do good deeds to make up for this. And this results in a society where everybody is trying to hide the worst things about them and present the good things about them.
Right.
So there's one pillar of this. Another pillar of this is this idea called the fitra. And the fitra is the idea that everyone is born pure, born Muslim, and it's their parents that make them a Jew, a Christian, a Sabian. So when somebody converts to Islam, Muslims call that reverting to Islam because they believe in the central purity of this. Another thing that's a pillar of this in Islamic culture is that the authority of parents is much bigger than it is in the Bible. Now, the Bible tells us to honor our father and mother. It tells children to obey their parents. But Genesis 3 says, a man shall leave his mother and father and hold fast to his wife.
Right.
So the understanding is a new family unit is made when a marriage happens. And the husband is now the head of that relationship. And that's the closest relationship he has.
Right.
So parenting, if that's the goal, if the goal of somebody is to grow and start their own family unit, then Christian parenting is preparing your children to live outside of your authority one day. In Islam, there is no such ejection point. So in part of my research for this, I was reading some fatwas and scholarly advice on how Muslims are supposed to navigate a conflict between their spouse and their parent. So there's one sort of article on Islam QA where there's several different opinions, but the question is, my mother wants me to divorce my wife. Should I obey my mother or should I stay with my wife? And some scholars said one thing and the other scholars said another thing. So some scholars say, no, you don't have to listen to your mother when she says this, especially if you fear harm from the divorce. And other scholars say, yeah, you should listen to your mother in this. If you ask that to Bible-believing Christians, we wouldn't even entertain the question.
Right.
Because it's so fundamentally against our conception of how an adult parent-child relationship should work.
And marriage, too.
And marriage should work, right?
Right.
That we would see that as something fundamentally toxic and unbiblical if your parent was asking you to divorce your spouse.
Right.
That's a line that no one's allowed to cross.
Right.
And so you have this basic assumption of parental authority, you have this basic assumption of everybody born pure, and you have this component of trying to hide your sins from everybody else, which kind of breeds this perfect storm of parents who tend to try and manage their children's life not through persuasion but through coercion. I am your parent, you listen to me, I have authority, end of the story. And any parent can fall into this, to be clear, right? This is not an exclusively Arab Muslim cultural problem. Any parent can be in the place where they just start to lean on their own authority and not on persuasion. Now, as Christians, we have this idea that since they're eventually going to become independent, then we are preparing to let them go one day, and just telling them what to do all the time is not fundamentally good for them. If you don't have that framework, well, I tell you what to do until your husband tells you what to do, unless he contradicts what I tell you to do.
Oh, yeah.
This makes people lazy in their parenting at times. So those are the storms there. And put that on the backdrop of a society that is getting rapidly more liberal, both in the West and in the Middle East. So this man's way of protecting the people he's responsible for protecting and loving the people he's supposed to love is dealing with a reality that isn't ultimately tenable. And when the reality he's holding on to meets the real world, his pride is wounded. He's scared for his daughter, and he thinks the solution to those things is an application of more of his authority, and
It feels like doesn't have control.
Doesn't have control over the situation, which he doesn't. He believes he's entitled to that control.
Yeah.
Then these things come in this perfect storm of attempting to murder his own daughter. Those are some of the things that lead to this storm.
Does honor killing come from like Japan?
I mean, so according to
Or maybe that's just
Wikipedia,
different.
I mean, again, honor shame culture again, right? But
it's everywhere.
that's a very unique Japanese iteration of that, where you honorably commit suicide, called seppuku.
Yeah.
So yes,
I'm curious, just like where.
I mean, except you commit suicide, right?
Well, you can kill your children. Maybe
Well,
there's been instances where you dishonor your child. Usually it's two at a time. It's different. There's nuances, but
even then, in the Japanese conception, that's actually a formulated idea of how that's supposed to work.
yeah,
This is not something that Islam or Arab culture actively promotes. This is just a kind of like perfect storm of a certain way of thinking, rubber hitting the road.
it's tradition.
I mean,
Like all
I think people
things.
will point to like
It's a the
the nebulous word Sharia, right,
Sure.
and use it as a way to either, well, essentially justify it. You know what I mean? Like, but the problem with the Sharia is it's a very nebulous term, right? It can mean whatever you think it means, and it's not like people who are doing honor killings here in the United States are trying to do an honor killing. They're like,
Yeah.
let me go ask my mom.
Right.
Like some emperor during some era of like, I don't know, during caliphates somewhere started this. That would be my assumption.
Well,
is how things are usually
I think the thing
embedded
is,
into a society. Is somebody with
So,
power starts it.
I have 6 kids.
Yeah.
Okay. Like, they make mistakes, right? And the way that I look at them and deal with them based on their mistake, right? So based on their mistake, there's either a consequence or there's grace, right? Or there's like, okay, just dust yourself off and start over again.
Mm-hmm.
But I am not living in an honor shame culture, right? I mean,
Mhm.
I grew up in one, and I definitely, experienced that, for instance, when I became a Christian. Like people were very upset. My mom was extremely upset
Yeah.
because it wasn't just that I became a Christian, it was that I had dishonored the family, right? But they did not try to kill me. You know what I mean? Like there was nothing like that. But knowing where my father came from, it definitely happens in Afghanistan, right? It definitely happens in Pakistan. I mean, we see reports of these kinds of things happening all over the world.
We did a episode
but
on this.
in high honor shame like arenas, and those are not specific to the Middle East. They're not specific to Islam. They happen in Africa. They happen in Southeast Asia. It's this idea of what you've done is a betrayal of what we are, right? Of what we are, of what our values are. And it's so severe that it requires your death, in order for us to save face, or at least like try to make it right. The only way for us to make it right is for you to die. And as disturbing as that is, particularly to our increasingly liberal, way of processing the world around us, and liberal in the sense that we're not talking about the 1800s, right? We're talking about a world in which technology is everywhere, and we have access to knowledge and all kinds of things, and community in ways that we never had it before. So, trying to like view these things through the outside, right? Of being like, well, it's of course reprehensible, but people have their reasons. And it's not a justification either. You know what I mean? Like they not their reasons. They have a rationale that they follow.
Actually,
right?
according to like the Canada's government, earliest recorded honor killings originated Western, so Roman Empire and actually Jewish communities, because of the early Jewish law that mandated that there'd be stoning for an adulterous wife and her partner. However, today the practice is most common in regions in North Africa and the Middle East.
Yeah.
But the origin's interesting here.
Well, and I think it's important to differentiate there, which the article does not, having a punishment enforced by the government versus some random uncle or relative doing it.
Of course.
Right.
Right.
So in the strictest interpretations of the Sharia, things like, having a non-marital relationship or adultery would have specific punishments. But the Sharia does not tolerate the grieved party going and killing their spouse or child or anything like that, right?
Sure.
So biblical, ancient Jewish law is not the same thing as honor killing.
Right.
No. So yeah, something that.
Also, the truth is, if you were to go back and look throughout Jewish history, which has been recorded in all of the Talmud and the Mishnah and all that other stuff, there are like very few, if any, instances where people actually stoned, like for instance, their child, right?
As the death penalty.
If a child is drunk, and is a bad child, and doesn't obey their parents and disgraces the community and commits all manner of sins, right? You're supposed to take him to the gates of the city, present them before the elders and say, this kid is worthless. And then, essentially take the kid out and stone them. But there are no instances of that. Right. So because it's a law, like in, a religion, for instance, doesn't necessarily mean people will act on it. The point of that law is more of a deterrent than anything else, right? Like it's a consequence. Sure. Has it happened? I don't know. Right. But the point is, and again, that's not an honor killing. It's not the parents stoning them. It's the community. It's the elders.
And
right?
so I guess in this case, James, you're trying to really hit on making the distinction of who gets to enforce these death penalties.
Right. So the reality is, by Islamic law, these parents would not be able to do that.
Would be.
That would be it would be a state function. If they were in an Islamic state, which was enforcing the rules of hudud, these capital punishments, this wouldn't be a capital crime.
Okay.
Refusing to marry somebody is not a capital crime under the Sharia. Even having like a boyfriend who you're not married to, who's not Muslim, again, there'd be lashes for that under the strictest interpretations of the hudud.
Gotcha.
But there wouldn't be death for that either.
Gotcha.
So by their own standards here, this would be a breach. By biblical standards, it's certainly a breach. And then by American standards, it's a breach too. So there's no law that these people are representing.
Well, yeah,
From
but
anywhere.
the problem is that that's also subjective, right? Like, you know, when the ISIS and the Taliban took power, you know, they were like shooting women for not wearing the correct the correct burqa.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you know, I saw one again because I watched them all of a woman who had red stripes in her burqa. She was an old woman, she's about the age of my mom, and they shot her on the spot because she wasn't wearing the right clothes. So, is that like that's the thing? It's Sharia is subjective in that way, right? Like, the Taliban and ISIS are going to look at it differently than, say, like the Muslim community that I grew up around in New Jersey and Passaic, right, in Trenton.
Yeah,
it's just different.
I agree with you, but
interpretive, I guess.
Sharia is certainly interpretive, but again, I think this is not. There's no Muslim scholar somewhere saying, "Hey, you should."
I see what you're saying.
Yeah. So sure, like exactly how something would be punished for sure is somewhat subjective. Depends on the scholar.
Such a good example of like these honor killings is such a clear example of any religion, wherever it's coming from, taking religious notions, religious decrees, religious even laws, and then like completely seeing how can I I don't know, just like how can I as a human totally like use this to my advantage, and then like acting on it, and like for generations after generation, all the way up until now. In this case, this is like a specific thing that families get behind and that like communities get behind and like exercise as warnings, as to retain honor.
So even
human flaw, it's a huge
it is, but I don't. More facts will come out for sure, but I think this instance here is, I don't think people are even thinking about it that clearly in the moment. Like, I'm not even. So I was talking to Sharjeel about this, who grew up in cultures that are more like this, and his opinion on this is that if the guy had shown up intending to murder his daughter, he'd have brought a knife.
He brought a knife.
Or a gun or a weapon.
Yeah.
Probably.
I think it looks like he snapped.
He looks like he snapped, right? That seems to be what happened in the circumstance.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, I think that, if there's an underlying rationale in a split second, that you're making it in a moment of anger, in the heat of anger, like, I'm just going to kill her because she's not listening to me and, taking away her honor. I don't think the words honor killing are like flashing through this particular guy's head.
No.
Right. It's not premeditated. There's no state of premeditation. I think that or there is, like, they're going and they're going to be like, we're going to kill her. But I think that if he really wanted her dead, he could have just hit her with the car. Right. Like, he could have done all kinds of things to just.
Okay. So this was like essentially like a human angry thing. Crazy.
Well,
human angry thing.
They're all based in human, right?
But then thought, I'll back it up later. If anything, like, I can back it up later with this.
And I mean, what's also crazy is I'm just picturing this in my mind, right? Like, the dad is there and he's got her in a headlock and he's trying to choke her out, MMA style, and the mom is running over, also trying to choke her out, right? Like, you know, in a like, I mean, this is Lacey.
Yeah.
My brother-in-law lives in Lacey. My wife grew up in Lacey,
Mm-hmm.
right? The reason why I knew the name of the high school was because that's the one that my brother-in-law went to.
Mm-hmm.
There are two. There's one in the north and one in this. You know what I mean? And Timberline is one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I had lunch. I had coffee today with someone who grew up in that area. Like, you know, lived right near that school.
Okay. Yeah.
The thing that's shocking about it, outside of the big principle, is how close to home it is. In my mind, like the where the person is from is like really relevant in this situation, because Iraqis have been here a minute.
Yeah.
Right? It's not like they flew like Afghans here. Right? It's not like they were drawing people out of these different places in the Middle East where there's crisis, and just kind of like trying to settle them here. I mean, the Iraqis have been here for, quite a while, right? Like, and I don't know how long these people have been in America, but there's definitely like a,
Yeah.
hopefully, I don't know all the details
Right.
of where they came or whatever, but there's enough of a presence of Iraqi families here, where I've never heard of like this honor killing.
No, I actually reached out to a friend of mine who works at the Iraqi Community Center,
Okay.
and they've also never come across anything like this in the Iraqi community in Washington.
I mean, I don't think it's the norm.
No, it's not.
So, again, not trying to like diminish the fact that, the dude did try to choke his daughter out in front of school,
Which people
Right.
do.
which is also crazy, right? Like, if you're going to commit a crime, you're going to sit there and say, like, who commits a murder in broad daylight? You know what I mean?
I hear you.
Yeah,
Which is why I credit to the news headlines, because it's not the norm. They didn't want to make it sound like the norm.
yeah,
It's like, this is possibly sounds like it might be his honor killing.
yeah. It's certainly not the norm, but I think it is. There are some things it is symptomatic of, and what those things are, what it's symptomatic of, is this is the very, very ugly tip of the iceberg.
Right.
Forced marriages are 100% a thing that happen in America today. And
Through the Almeida Initiative, we've dealt with those.
yeah, we've dealt with these.
We've dealt with those. So yeah.
We had a girl from Afghanistan who was being forced to marry her cousin, and we had to help her get out of that situation and get her a place to stay.
Right.
And thankfully, we managed to resolve the situation with the family, and now she's back living with her parents, and they've actually have a good relationship now. So it's all good. But these forced marriage situations,
Those are prevalent.
they're prevalent, right? It's a real problem, and people get out of those in several different ways, or a lot of people don't get out of them.
And now later on, I want you to keep going on your train of thought. Later on, how would you respond to somebody who says like, well, this is my culture of forced and arranged marriages. Like, you're overimposing your Western,
values
and traditions. We can hit on that. Keep going on what you're saying, but I'm just being the voice of the outsider right now.
It's actually really interesting, like the idea of arranged marriages in Islam versus other.
Sure,
You
it's
totally
it's
do a whole nother. You
nuanced,
could do a whole nother podcast on
but
that.
All right, there's nuance. There's nuance to it, and so I don't want to say the Western way of dating is the absolute pinnacle of reality. I like having more family involvement in dating, I think, is generally a positive thing, and there's things we can learn from Eastern cultures. But if you're pushing it to the extent that your daughter is begging not to be married to somebody and you're just pushing her towards that, that's evil. And it doesn't matter what culture you're from,
Right.
that's evil according to the laws of God himself.
Right.
And
Washington,
and Washington in America.
And then right. Yeah.
which is I'm personally glad that I don't know. I would love to maybe even meet her one day, but I mean, like, I don't know. I'm personally glad that I don't know. It's kind of good that this man did snap in the way that he snapped because, in broad daylight, because then something that was hidden and not talked about, was kind of came out to the light, and like these issues as the dad of the boyfriend was saying, like people can't have conversations about this, and like schools and like how you deal with a culture that isn't your own when it is, breaking the law of, in this case, Washington,
right,
and America. So I don't know. I kind of, and she's alive. She's not, hopefully now, I don't know. It doesn't seem, I don't see how now she could then be forced. I don't know. I'm kind of happy.
I think it's interesting that they like put her in another house, and then they gave her like a safer place to stay.
Mm-hmm.
But then they were like, you got to ride the bus to school, which is like, are you kidding me? That's like asking, you're just setting her up for another attack,
Mm-hmm.
If there is premeditation involved.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like,
well, she said, she'd been threatened already.
She'd already been. It sounded like there was already like the police involved, right? Didn't that article sound like that? Like,
yes.
There was a reported incident. You know what I mean, and a restraining order and all that other stuff.
Yeah.
So I think it's actually really important to think about it too, because the way that our society deals with like domestic violence, for instance, right?
Yeah.
It's easy to get a restraining order for a woman who's being abused.
Mm-hmm.
It's really hard to get the cops to do anything about it.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you got to call them. You got to make sure that you're safe. It takes time for them to come out. Here in Washington, we, after like defund the police, we have even less police than we did before. So, the police are stretched thin, and they're going to look at certain things and put them on a lower priority list. So if the guy has a gun, they'll be right out, right? If the person that you have the restraining order against. But if not, they'll get to it when they are able to get to it. So watching, this girl have to deal with this very foreign idea.
Yeah.
In our like legal system.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like there's a lot of like, I don't know. It doesn't seem like our legal system adapted in her favor, right? It doesn't seem like the social services that stepped out to help her and give her a safe place to stay were like really looking at what she was going through. You know what I mean? They're trying to view her problem through the lens of the way that they've dealt with other people who have gone through domestic, or abuse or whatever, but they're not understanding, what she actually is going through.
Sure, there's a lack of understanding.
Yeah.
From these.
Well, I think it's just a lack of context, and then on top of that, nobody looks at social services in any state in the country and go, wow, those work really well.
Right.
I mean,
and so it's not used to dealing with certain cultural problems. And when I say cultural problems, I'm not talking about a general problem within Arab culture. I'm talking about a problem that does exist within Arab culture. Mm-hmm. There's a big difference.
Right.
So the Bible says, talking about a widow, but it applies generally, she is free to be married to whom she wishes, only in the Lord. So a woman is supposed to have a choice in who she marries. And in most Arab marriage dynamics, it's not a forced marriage most of the time. Most of the time, parents kind of bring suitors, and then the individuals make a decision about that. Now, there may be various levels of coercion applied or not applied within that, and that starts to become complicated. But I really want people listening not to think this as all Arabs are functioning in this sort of forced marriage kind of way, because it really isn't true.
Or all Muslims.
Yeah, or all Muslims. Most people are not doing it this way, but the whole forced marriage, especially to family members, exists.
Yep.
I
And-
guess some older outside the country, like shipping her back to Iraq.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like there's more to that.
Yes.
There's something else
Well,
going on.
I mean, I think they do it because they can't get like it's not something that would necessarily
Or maybe they
work
didn't like her
here.
boyfriend and were like,
Sure.
this is totally outside of our value system. Like, go back and learn. Go back and fit. And
That's a good
figure out.
observation too.
Yes.
That's a very good observation.
This is exactly it. I would like to quote to you Rami season 1, episode 8,
Okay.
where Rami's default reaction when he feels like his life has got too compromised
Okay.
is to go back to the old country
Yes.
Right.
and go back to his roots.
Yes.
And that's almost certainly what's going on with these parents here. They're looking at her life and being like, we're concerned about the direction your life is going in. The solution to this is going back to our roots. So we're solving this problem by marrying you to a man with proper Iraqi Muslim values that's going to keep your life pure and you're going to give you a happier, healthier life in the long run.
Right.
Sure.
So now, like, yeah,
Yeah.
there's so much, but she didn't want that.
Well, I mean,
So clearly,
it's clear what she wanted. She wanted to the safe place that she felt was her boyfriend
and the school
and the
it
boyfriend's
said that
family.
they were
right?
talking. She was talking to counselors
Yeah.
and stuff there.
I mean, that's a whole nother.
God bless counselors. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
When I was in high school, counselors were like, I feel like saved me in a lot of ways. Like, counselors do so much work
Mhm.
that they don't get paid enough to, like this.
Sure.
Where like,
Sure.
yeah.
So this actually brings us to a kind of very important point for somebody who's kind of in a situation like this. It's very, very, very important for someone, especially who's an immigrant here, to form a support system outside of their immediate family and maybe even culture.
Right. And if you are a Muslim and listening to this and that kind of raises your hackles, we're not talking about subversion,
Mm-mm.
right? We're talking about support. It's different.
Mhm.
It's not trying to like brainwash anybody out of a culture or out of a religion.
It's just helping giving
Right.
tools
It's
to
resources.
navigate
It's resources.
these
Yeah.
things.
Yeah. And if you're living in the US, you want people who love you outside of your immediate group, because I think community and family can be both the best thing and the worst thing at the same time.
Sure.
And when it turns dark, it turns really dark. Conversely, the other way around,
Yeah.
this should be a wake-up call to Christians living in the Seattle area that again, these kind of things can have the effect of making people look on other cultures with disgust
Just-
and disdain and not wanting these people here.
in the country, sure.
And that's the wrong reaction if applied broadly. Now, do I want the parents who are forcing their daughter to marry somebody and trying to kill her when she doesn't in America? No, but I certainly want that daughter here.
hmm
And being a friend, being a support system to make sure people from other cultures are known and loved here will help. Light is the greatest disinfectant.
Right.
And actually, as awful as this was, her support system saved her this time.
Saved her life.
Right? She survived this,
Mhm.
and she'll be able to live and have a life she wants now because she had this support structure in
I
place.
think it's important as Christians too to remember that, if you don't like actively work to cultivate relationships with people who aren't Christians, right? Or just outside of your thing, you're putting yourself in a position where, maybe someday somebody would need some help and you just are not there, right? Like maybe God wants you to be involved in somebody's life as a positive influence and a person who helps, right? And in kind of just like shrinking back from it,
Yeah.
And I think it's easier too for the American like Christian to wrap their mind around being friends with an atheist
Then
and it's harder to say, I want to be friends with a Muslim, right? I mean, that's what we've found. I think it's really like something that you have to encourage people in, right? So I'm not saying like go be friends with a Muslim so you can prevent an honor killing. I'm saying open yourself up to who God wants to draw you to in that moment. And if that person is a Muslim, proceed with the same amount of faith and courage,
Yeah.
right? That God would, meet you the same way he'd be meeting you and meeting with an atheist
And it
or
could
meeting
go-
with, right.
and it could go a long way and potentially make a difference. For example, Ali or Isan and Sarah, if maybe if even if like I don't know, even if like oh gosh, I don't know, like the school counselors or somebody or Christians that they met at the grocery store or something were able to like even just listen, like, oh, okay, I hear that you're really concerned about your daughter. I hear you. I hear you. I hear you. Like listening to, like you said, to their even like their reasoning and concern. And perhaps they wouldn't feel so much like, this Western culture is going to destroy us. Like at least if people could, you don't have to agree. You can say like, I don't agree with like, but at least having a dialogue so that people don't feel so like
I want to put it out there.
attacked.
I want to put it out there that one of my parents' like greatest fears was everyone being assimilated.
Yeah.
And losing your Turkish identity, right? Like being, losing your heritage. And I think that pushes people towards echo chambers,
Yes.
right? So you're not going to necessarily go find a Christian and as a Muslim and say, explain to me why you're all trying to steal my children. Like, you know what I mean? You're going to go to another Muslim and commiserate.
Right.
So like to
Dialogue.
the Christian and to the Muslim, right?
Yeah.
The enemy of let's just say progress is the wrong word. I mean, I'm sure I'll come up with the word after all of this. Is to step out of those echo chambers, right?
Echo chambers.
Like my dad was very like he tried very hard to make sure that we had our roots in our culture. And to some extent he succeeded and to some extent he failed, right? Like
Clearly by your Nike hat
bro,
that you're wearing right now. I'm kidding.
the fact that I said bro and not Avi.
There you go.
The other, I think, important thing to think about here is if you talk about the Iraqi community in Washington, there would be lots of people who would definitely help in this situation,
Right.
but typically immigrants are afraid to confide in people from their own community. There's trust issues there.
Yeah.
And what I'd recommend if you find yourself in a situation like this, go and get help from people from their own culture as well. So when we helped this Afghan girl escape the forced marriage, having Sharjeel, a Pashto speaker, on side with us was a night and day difference because we were able to communicate, look, this isn't about us trying to get your daughter out of the culture, but you live in America and you can't force your daughter to marry her cousin anymore.
Right.
That's the reality here. This is not Afghanistan. You can't do that here.
Right. And remember, the way that we did that was with Sharjeel, like we, with you, right? Wasn't somebody from one of the relief agencies there, like, involved in the conversation?
Yeah.
Like it's more than just, a matter of preference of who your daughter's going to marry. This is a civic thing, right?
Yes.
Like you've stepped out of the realm of like your context and now you're operating in a different context. And for your own good, you should let that go.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we have an opportunity to be good neighbors here, not in a sort of preachy, domineering way, but using appropriate sense of force of law, but more importantly, by bringing light into the situation. And light is the best disinfectant here.
Yeah.
And so we got to be, if we're not close to our neighbors, we can't be light to our neighbors. It's a simple formula.
Right.
And then I think for closing, because we're running out of time here, you kind of asked, for sort of biblical explanation on what honor is, because that's kind of what this comes to. How do you deal with honor? And the biblical scenario, time after time, if you read through the book of Proverbs,
Yeah.
is that humility comes before honor.
Okay.
You are never supposed to pursue your own honor in the Bible. You're supposed to pursue the honor of others. You're supposed to pursue your humility, and you wait for God's time to honor you.
Right. And when people try to honor themselves or promote themselves, it's usually like there's a negative thing that happens.
Or
to them,
force somebody
right?
to honor you as opposed to letting God.
Yeah. And again, you want to make sure that, like, in this context, a parent would be like, well, my child needs to honor me,
Yeah.
right? Because I'm the parent, I'm the authority, right? But it's interesting because a lot of the things that people will point to outside of within Christianity, not outside of Christianity, like and point to verses or whatever. Jesus said that the two greatest commands are love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And that's the proof text for interpreting what your action should be. So if you land in a place where you're not loving God and you're loving yourself more than loving God, you're off, right? If you land in a place where you're not loving your neighbor, right? The way that God would love you, the way that God would have you love them, you're off. And I think it's important to remember that, like, in dealing with situations like this, because you can sit there and say, like, it's not my problem, or it is my problem, and I want to, wind up in a place of like judging that other person, right? Like, neither one of those things are the right response.
So I want to end with this.
Yeah.
It says, Proverbs 18:12 says, before destruction, a man's heart is haughty, but humility comes before honor.
Yeah, it's great.
And this is exactly what's played out in this situation.
Even God himself humbles in the form of Jesus, comes to a point of humility on the cross before the honor and the glory that come with him atoning for everything,
So
becoming king.
What you see here is a man caught up in his own pride, and that has led to his ultimate humiliation.
Yeah.
On the ground, attempting and failing to murder his own daughter, and now disgraced in his own community, in the community, the foreign community, and every like newspaper in the world at this point.
Sure.
Right. And that's what pride does to a person. But humility leads to the opposite of that.
Yeah.
Well, guys,
Yeah.
thank you for listening to Christ and Caliphate. We will be back next time.